reminded of a story. These two country boys, they were hitchhiking to California. And they start hitchhiking, and finally this trucker picks them up, and he says, they get in the truck, and he says, where you guys going? And one of them country boys said, we're going to San Jose. And that trucker, he was trying to be nice, and he thought for a minute. And he said, I think they pronounced that San Jose there. And they didn't say nothing. And there were quite a few more minutes, and finally the trucker asked another question, said, well, how long y'all going to be there? And that one says, all about who or who lies. We learn fast, don't we? I tell you, I've been, this is a neat story I'm going to tell you today, but we've been talking, last week I talked about trust, and I actually thought I was just going to do 2 weeks, but I sort of did this, added another week to this, so we'll, Lord willing, we'll get through with it next week. But last week I started talking about this subject of trust. And if there's one thing that all of us can identify with, and that is that we've all been taken advantage by someone who we once trusted. And we've all put our, we put our trust in someone who's let us down. And if we're to be honest, and we'll talk about it next week, there have been times that you and I have been untrustworthy as well. Now, a lot of that comes from misunderstandings and perceptions, but we've been that way as well. So we've been taken advantage of by people that we once trusted, number one. And number two, when you think about, we talked about when you think about where you work, whether it's your, whether you employ people, and it's somebody that you employ that you trusted that's let you down, or maybe a boss that you work for that they've let you down. And so you have a hard time trusting people maybe in your place of work. And then we also talked about actually that study by the leaders, or by the Institute of Management or Leadership and Management, that discovered that in the public sector, the highest areas of mistrust are the government, financial institutions, insurance companies, and the press. It's just the way it is. I didn't make the rules, all right? But yet, as I said, against all of this mistrust that we live in every day, against all of that mistrust, there's that one word that we talked about last week from this guy by the name of Solomon, and who was King David's son, who, if you remember, when he became the king, God says, tell me what you want. And he asked for wisdom. And so God said, because you didn't ask for wealth or power, I'm going to give you all three. I'm going to make you the wisest man that ever lived. I'm going to make you wealthy, and I'm going to make you powerful. And he did just that. So in all of Solomon's writing, he had anything he wanted. He had everything he wanted. But he says this. He said, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your path. But the problem is this: if we can't trust those people in our personal life, and we can't trust those people where we work, and if we can't trust those in our social life, how are we supposed to ever trust again, and how are we supposed to even trust God? How do we do that? And again, Solomon gives us the answer. We give him, God, all of our trust. And that's what it says. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your path. So he says, so we're to give God all of our trust, not part of it. And don't give trust in something else, but put all your trust in God. And the reason that we're to do that is because every part of our life falls under God's care, authority, and rule. Okay? Every part, everything is under the umbrella of God, right? God is in control. Everything is under the umbrella of God. So if we give God all of our trust, everything else will fall under that. Every part of our life falls under God's care, authority, and rule. And the illustration that I used last week was, again, when Stuart and I went parasailing several years ago at Myrtle Beach, and we went parasailing. We found this company that does that, and everything was good until we got 75 or 100 feet in the air. And then I began to look around and realized that he and I both, there were 4 carabiners between me and falling into the ocean like a rock. And that was it, you know. And you see where they're at here, you know. So instead of me holding right here like I did at first, like she is, I sort of moved my hand up to about right here. So because I didn't trust those little things, and I'm thinking, my goodness, you know, what have I got myself into here? So what I began to do is I began to take my mind off of the trust of the company, okay? And I began to put my mind on, or my trust in what fell under the rule and the authority and the care of that company, right? That's what I did. You see, I put all my trust in those things that, yes, they were important. That carabiner was important, but it fell under the care, the authority, and the rule of the company that I was doing business with. And when I gave them my money, that company, when I gave them my money, I did it because I trusted the business, right? I trusted it. And why did I do business with this company? Because, we talked about this last week, because I perceived that company that they had ability, benevolence, and integrity, and that's what trust is based upon. Okay? That's what trust is based upon. It's based on the perception. It may not be right, but if you perceive this person or this company or whatever, if you perceive them to have ability, and that is they can do what they say they'll do. If you go to a doctor and a doctor says, you know what, I can do open heart surgery, the only way you're going to let them do open heart surgery is you perceive that they have the ability, right? So I'll trust them because they have the ability. And then they have the benevolence, and that is, do they care? What's their motives for doing what they do? So the benevolence, and then the integrity, and that is, will they do what they say they will do? So I go to this company, Parasail Company, and I say, we want to do this, and I say they do it all the time. I perceive that they have the ability to do what I'm asking them to do. I perceive that they care if I live or die. And I perceive that they will do what they say they will do. And therefore, I give them my trust, right? Pretty simple. That's what we do. But here's what I want to talk about today. Sometimes trust gets twisted in a different way. It gets twisted in a different way. You see, the reason that I placed my trust in something else was because I had fear. Because I placed my trust in, not in the company, but I looked at those carabiners, is because I felt that I was in a difficult situation. I had some fear, and therefore I took my trust away from the company and put it on those little things. And in our trust when it comes to God, the reason that we don't trust God sometimes is because that we go through difficult times, we go through fear, we go through hardships, and we think all of these little things are what we need to put our trust in instead of God. So sometimes trust gets twisted that way. And sometimes it gets twisted a different way. It's not that fear or hardship or failure takes our trust away from God, but it's just the opposite. It's just the opposite, what takes our trust away from God. Sometimes everything is going really good. And not only is it going really good, but sometimes you are the champ. And sometimes nobody's better than you and is going to be better than you. And sometimes you're having unbelievable successes in your life. And sometimes it seems that no matter what you do, those successes keep coming. And sometimes the money and the position and the popularity, they come from everywhere, and all of a sudden your trust and my trust is transposed, right? And here's what happens. The undeserved become the deserved. Once I didn't deserve it, now, well, I deserve this. Not only does the undeserved become deserved, but now the incapable becomes the capable. And the humble now becomes the prideful. And then our trust moves from the blesser to the blessing. You know what I'm talking about? I take my mind off of the one who's blessed me and where all this come from. And now my trust goes to the things that He has blessed me with. And we take our trust away from God and we actually put it on ourselves. So I'm going to tell you one of my favorite stories in the Bible. I just love this story, especially I love the end of this story. But anyway, let me tell you about it. But let me tell you who it involves. It involves David. David was the second king of Israel, okay? He was God's sort of hand-picked king. He was picked at a very young age, even though he didn't take the throne until later. And he came after Saul, and he was Solomon's father, okay? This King David. I mean, when you think of the Jews, this is who they hold up more than anybody else, right? Is David. You think of the star of David. And you think that all these things about David. The Bible says about David, God said about David that David was a man after God's own heart. Okay? A man after God's own heart. But unlike Solomon, David was a warrior all of his life. Now, just bear with me a minute. He was a warrior all of his life. In fact, David always wanted to build a house for God, a temple. But God wouldn't let him. He said, I'm going to let your son Solomon do it. He did. He said, I'm going to let your son Solomon do it because you are a man of war. He was a warrior. And because David is that guy, as most of you may know, that defeated Goliath. Now, the David and Goliath story is not a story that is sort of, you just make up, you know, that we just sort of use as an allegory in business. It's a real story. And it was David, as a youngster, that went when his brothers and the Israelites were fighting against the Philistines. And Philistines had a giant, 9 feet tall, that was, his name was Goliath. And so David went and fought him. So David was this man of warrior. He was a warrior. And he was the guy who defeated Goliath. And when David was young, he always recognized that it was not the weapons that would give him victory, but it was always God. David always saw himself as the underdog. That everybody else had everything they needed, but I, David, would have to trust in God. When it comes to Goliath, here's what David said when he was defeating Goliath. David said to the Philistine, you come against me with a sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. And then the next 2 verses down says this, all those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and He will give all of you into our hands. Now let me ask you something. Who was David putting trust in? What he had, who he was, or was he putting his trust in God? Put his trust in God, right? Not only that, but another thing about David that you know is David wrote most of the Psalms. So David is now getting in battles as he gets older, and he's battling the Ammonites, he's battling the Syrians, and there's two things that the Ammonites and the Syrians had. They had lots of chariots, and they had lots of horses. And so here's what David writes, also in Psalm 20, he said this, now this I know, the Lord gives victory to His anointed. He answers him from His heavenly sanctuary with the victorious power of His right hand. Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. Now again, David, underdog, even though he's a king, who was David trusting in? He wasn't trusting in what he had. He wasn't trusting in his people. He wasn't trusting in all his chariots or horses, but he was saying, you know what? You may have all of that better than us, but we are going to trust in God. That was how David grew up. But later in life, he was a king now. David was a king with a whole lot of assets. I mean, he had all the assets, okay? He had all the power, he had all the money, and he had all the people. And he had conquered much of the land around him. And he wanted to know how many troops that he actually had, or people that he actually had. But the problem was, there was a law in Exodus 30 that talked about you were not allowed to take a census. But David was going to take a census. And I'll talk about that a little later. But he was going to take a census, and he was going to do it, number one, without God telling him to do it. And he was going to do it in a way that God, he wasn't supposed to do it. And that is this. When they took a census back in the book of Numbers, and guess why the book of Numbers is called Numbers? They took a census. Okay? In fact, they took two censuses. Okay? Censi. They took two of them. Every time they took a census, God took a census with his people, they had to pay for this census. The people did. It amounted to about $5 today. It wasn't no big deal. It didn't matter if you were a rich person or not. Everybody just gave $5, and it was actually called ransom money. But what it did, it said, you know what? We're giving this. It went to the temple, actually. It went to the treasury of God. And they would give that $5 to say, you know what? I fall under the ownership and the rule of God. And God would take this census. So now David's taking the census. He's doing it without God telling him to do it. And he's not doing it the way that God says to do it. Okay? And not only that, but his motives for taking that census was all wrong. Okay? Well, I'm going to tell you the story. But it was all wrong. And so not only was he all wrong in it, but it wasn't just him. It was many of the people of Israel who sinned. And here's the way the story starts. Satan rose up against Israel and caused David to take a census of the people of Israel. Let me pause right there. This passage, and it's parallel in 2 Samuel 24. It's parallel. It has a lot of apologetic type material in it. Don't have time for it all. But again, I believe in Satan. If you've been here long enough, you believe in Satan. Why do we believe in Satan? Because Jesus believed in Satan, and his testimony is sort of pretty good, all right? So Satan rose up against Israel and, okay, not just David, but Israel, and caused David to take a census of the people of Israel. So David said to Joab, now Joab was sort of the Secretary of Defense. I mean, he was over all of the armies, okay? He was the top dog, okay? Joab had been all over the world with David, killing all kinds of people. He was the main guy, okay? So David said to Joab and the commanders of the army, take a census of all the people of Israel from Beersheba in the south to Dan in the north, and bring me a report so I may know how many there are. Well, immediately, we're going to read it, immediately Joab knew that, man, this was wrong. And he tried to talk David out of it. Here's what he said. But Joab replied, he's telling us today, may the Lord increase the number of his people 100 times over. But why, my Lord, the king, do you want to do this? Are they not all your servants? Why must you cause Israel to sin? So here's the king and his own guy. And he's got to do what the king tells him to do. And so David says, we're going to take a census. And Joab says, man, let me tell you something. I hope the Lord gives you 100 times more people than you've already got. But why do you want to do this? Aren't they all your people now? Why do you need to count them? He knew that his motive was wrong. And he tried to talk Joab out of it. Thank you, brother. And he tried to talk Joab out of it. But he couldn't do it. And Joab spent 9 months going throughout the kingdom counting the people, except for, and I'll show it to you, except for there's two tribes, the tribe of Benjamin and Levi, I think. The tribe of Benjamin and Levi, the Bible says he was so repulsed over this whole thing that he just quit. Here's what it says. But Joab did not include Levi and Benjamin in the numbering, because the king's command was repulsive to him. This command was also evil in the sight of God, so he punished Israel. So he punished Israel. So, man, Joab came back, and you know, it was like 1.1 million people of just men who were warriors. And he came back with this. He wouldn't count the rest of it. But you see what it says, that the command was evil in the sight of God, so God was going to punish David and Israel for doing this. Okay, you with me? So God was going to punish David. And here's what he said. He sent Gad, which was a prophet, to David. And he said, David, you sinned. You sinned, and you've got 3 choices of what can happen. He says, number 1, you can have a famine for 3 years. You can choose that. Or number 2, you can choose being plundered by the enemy for 3 months. Or you can have a plague for 3 days. And actually, it was pretty neat that David chose the plague. And in fact, here's how it reads. It says, but Joab did not include, okay, we just got that. David said to Gad, I am in deep distress. Let me fall into the hands of the Lord, for his mercy is very great. But do not let me fall into human hands. So the Lord sent a plague on Israel, and 70,000 men of Israel fell dead. And God sent an angel to destroy Jerusalem. And I'll get to that in a minute. So the reason, the reason that David picked that is because actually that was the price that you would pay if you took a census without God. It would be a plague. So David said, you know what, I don't want to fall into the hands of the enemy. But I want to put my life in the hands of God, because God above them would be merciful. And 3 days, and 70,000 men died. That's the price to pay, wasn't it? Now again, there's a lot of apologetic stuff in there I can't deal with right now. But it's okay. So, here's what it says right after that. Well, let me go back. Remember the last line. So 70,000 men of Israel fell dead, and God sent an angel to destroy Jerusalem. Now we're going to get ready to destroy the city of Jerusalem and the people of Jerusalem. Okay? An angel was getting ready to destroy Jerusalem. Here's what happened. But as the angel was doing so, the Lord saw it and relented concerning the disaster, and said to the angel who was destroying the people, enough. Withdraw your hand. The angel of the Lord was then standing at the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. Okay? Now this is really, really neat. And I don't know if we'll get it on. But he was standing at the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. Okay? We'll talk about where that is. Okay, I'm getting something. So let's look at the next 2 verses. David looked up, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing between heaven and earth with a drawn sword in his hand extended over Jerusalem. Then David and the elders, clothed in sackcloth, fell face down. And David said to God, was it not I who ordered the fighting men to be counted? I, the shepherd, have sinned and done wrong. Now, that was not the case. He hadn't sinned and done wrong, but so had many of the children of Israel, okay? But David was willing to take the blame. He said, I'm the shepherd, I've sinned and done wrong. And he said this, these are but sheep. What have they done? Lord my God, let your hand fall on me and my family, but do not let this plague remain on your people. Man, I tell you, there's a price to pay for doing what? Well, we'll talk about it, mainly taking your trust away from God. So it was a terrible day. But let me tell you the rest of the story. This is such a deep story. So we saw that now he's at this altar or this place, this land of this guy by the name of Araunah. And Araunah had a threshing floor. A threshing floor was where they took grain or wheat and they would beat it. And it would be on a hill. And they would throw the wheat up and the chaff would fall away. And the seed that they would be collecting, it would fall to the ground and everything else would blow away. So God says, go to Araunah and buy the threshing floor of Araunah, because I want you to sacrifice. Make a sacrifice. So David goes to Araunah and says, Araunah, I want to buy your property, this threshing floor. I want to buy it from you, and I want to give you top price for it. And Araunah was, just not far away from actually where David was at the time, Jerusalem, the main part of Jerusalem. And Araunah, very honorable, said this to David. He said, David, I'll tell you what, I will give you the threshing floor. And not only will I give you the threshing floor, I will give you all of the implements that you need for the sacrifice. And not only that, but I will give you the wood to make the sacrifice. And not only that, but I will give you the prize bull I've got to sacrifice to the Lord. I'll give it to you. And David, and he said, and David said no. In fact, here's what he said. But King David replied to Araunah, no, I insist on paying the full price. This is my favorite line, probably in all the Bible. I will not take for the Lord what is yours, that's it, or sacrifice a burnt offering that costs me nothing. Isn't that a great line? One version puts it this way, that I will not offer to God that which costs me nothing. Man, what a statement. You know, there's one thing that you and I, you've heard me say many times, is that we come here on a Sunday morning primarily for encouragement. I believe that's the number one reason we come here today on Sunday morning. And you know that it's number one on my list when you come here. That, man, I'm going to pray for you that God just blesses your socks off. Okay? I'm just going to do it. You know, and if he don't want me to do it, then, you know, he can stop me. But until he stops me, I'm praying that God just pours it out on you. Y'all good with that? Okay. I do that. But let me tell you why that I believe today is a day of encouragement. Because I believe that our faith costs us something. I do. And if it's costing you something, then what you need from me and each other is you need to be encouraged. Right? Because faith is supposed to cost us something. If we're a true follower of Christ, it will. So not only on that day did God accept the offering, but here's what's neat about that. On this place where Arana had this threshing floor, let me tell you what happened on that place. One thing is called, on that place was where Abraham was going to sacrifice his own son. And God stayed that sacrifice. After this, after David did that, he said, not only that, but this is going to be the place, David, that your son is going to build the temple. Not only that, did Solomon build the temple, but the temple was built after that. Today it's a mosque. Today it looks like this. I've been there. And inside of that mosque, it's what's neat about it, surrounded by all of that. That's a Muslim mosque that anybody can go visit, but it's owned by the Muslims. Inside of that is the stone, the rock, the big slab where Abraham was going to sacrifice his own son. And that is where David offered a sacrifice to God. And not only did God accept that offering that day, but once again, he told David that that'd be the place where the house of the Lord will be built. Now let me give you some things real quick. What do we learn from this story? Let me tell you what to learn. First of all, David was called, you heard me say that, David was called a man after God's own heart. Now what does this mean? This means that David was beloved by God. He was all through his ministry, and what we get from that is this. You and I are good people. You're great people. I'm telling you, I love you. Sometimes I'm a hugger, and sometimes I'm not. But I promise you, most of the time, I can hug everyone. Some of you guys a little less. But I promise you. And what I'm saying is, what we learn from this, is no matter how good a person or Christian that we can be, we have the potential to take our trust away from God and put it on the blessings that He's given us. He can have any of us. And the second thing, what he did, remember this, David claimed as his own what was rightfully God's. You see, you and I are not allowed to take an inventory of other people's stuff. And David was taking an inventory of what was not his. Then the third thing, what happened to David, he moved his trust from the blesser to the blessing. And that's what we do when success comes. It's what we're tempted to do. Is we're tempted to trust in what God has blessed us with and to realize and move that. I mean, take that from God, trusting in God to what God has blessed us with. You see, everything we are, everything we have, because of God, right? If you're a follower of Christ, I'm going to get to you specifically in a second. I'm done. Everything we are is because you realize your physical health is because of God. Some of you like exercise. Some of you like, we're hiking. We're all these things. You know what I'm saying? And it's easy sometimes to say, you know what, I'm thankful, or I'm this, or I'm that. Let me tell you something. None of us are anything. It's only God that we were not born in a wheelchair. It's only God. Everything we have is because of God. Some of you students, you say, man, I'm smart. No, you're not. You're gifted. And what does that mean? Somebody has to give you a gift. And there's no reason why you and I could not be born. We know plenty of people who are born without the mental capacity to do what you students have done. It all comes from God. The place you were born. No matter how smart you are, no matter what you have sometimes. But what if you were trying to carry all that out in North Korea right now? Or somewhere else? Did you deserve that? I didn't. It comes from God. Our possessions. Here's what's neat about that. It'd be a great, if you want to read this is a great story to read. If you want to read a really, really good story, read Deuteronomy chapter 6 through 8. Here's what's neat. These folks, the children of Israel, have been 40 years, okay, now pay attention. 40 years they've been wandering through the desert, right? They've been eating the same meal every day. And it wasn't bacon. Bacon would have been good. They're eating dry manna and bread every day. Now here's it. God has just brought them from the land, Egypt, of not enough. They didn't have enough straw to make brick. They didn't have enough of anything. God has just delivered them from a land of not enough. And He's bringing them for 40 years through a land of just enough. I'm going to give you just what you need. You're not allowed, He said, to hoard any food for the next day. Eat what I give you today, 40 years, just enough. And now, they're getting ready to cross into this land in the book of Deuteronomy. They're ready to cross into this land. You know what that land's called? The land flowing with milk and honey. And God's telling them, He said, you're going to go into this land and you're going to have, there's going to be trees with fruit that you didn't plant. There's going to be things growing that you didn't plant. It's going to have all these things that you didn't do. So He's bringing them out of the land of not enough, through the land of just enough, into a land of more than enough. And all through that chapter, Deuteronomy chapter 6 and 8, here's what He's saying. Don't say. Don't get prideful. Don't start putting your trust in those things. And here's what He says. He says, you may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember, the Lord your God. For it is He who gives you the ability to produce wealth. Let me give you a modern day illustration. I'm getting very close. Let me give you a modern illustration. The NBA, can I get a witness? Has never been more popular than it is right now. I've got a 3-hour drive when I leave here, and I'll have to 3-hour drive home. I got to be home by 8 o'clock because Game 2 of the NBA is coming on. And there's one guy who has transformed the NBA in the last couple of years. His name is Steph Curry. And Steph Curry is one of the most popular people now in the country. And he's a Christian guy. I'm not saying you have to pull for the Golden State Warriors. I'm not. I'm just telling you he's a good guy. Okay? And Steph Curry, here's what he does every time that he makes a basket. Right? What does he do? He taps his heart. He points up. Right? Years ago when he first started that, he started with his mother, but he tapped twice. Points up. He maybe tapped twice now, it's just real quick, I can't see it, right? So he taps, and he points up. And when he was asked why he did that, here's what he said. He said, it basically means have a heart for God. Here's what he says. It keeps the perspective for me why I play the game and where my strength comes from. Now he could say, I practice and I practice and I deserve and I deserve. But you know what? He keeps the perspective because he knows that he's the one that could have been born with no arms. He's the one that could have been born in another place. He could have been born to another family. He could have been born without that gift. So he makes a bucket and taps and points to remind himself and to keep the perspective of where strength comes from. Now, if you're not a follower of Christ, you can tune out right now, okay? Check your Facebook, email, just check it out. Okay? If you're not, this is for just Christians right here, just for Christians, okay? Let me tell you why God uses money to test our trust. Okay, let me just tell you why God uses money to test our trust. First of all, because money is currency, right? And currency buys what we want and what we need. Not only is money currency, but it is universal. That is, no matter where you go in the world, there is something that is considered money, right? And whatever that money is, that currency is used to buy what we need or what we want. And see, every time you and I give, whenever you give, and let me just say that now, and some of you already know this, I have never, for 20, 30 years or whatever, I've pastored, when I pastored, I have never one time looked at what anybody put in an offering plate. Let me tell you why. It's a big trust word. I don't trust me. Okay? That's why. I don't trust me. Because if you gave a whole lot of money, I really want to buddy up with you. And if you don't, I wouldn't. So I don't trust me. All right? So I never care. I don't look. Let me tell you why. I'm not really good at this, but what I try to do is say, you know what? If I'm doing what I'm doing now, I don't need to trust you to make this church work. I need to trust God, right? So I don't look. So this is not about you, whatever. But what I'm saying is, whenever you and I give from the currency that we have, that buys what God has given us and what we want, what we need, you know what? In one way we're doing, we're just saying this. We're saying, It'd be a great thing to do that every time you go to the offering basket back there, that you, whatever you give, that you just tap and you point. Because you realize that what you have, what God's blessed you with, has not come from your own hand, but it's come from God. Right? And every time you healthy people are able to hike and run and bike and play ball, and that every time you give your service to God, it costs you something. But every time you're doing something for God, it's your way of saying, boom, boom, God, I'm able to walk from the back of the parking lot at Walmart. I will park in the rain at the very end of the road. I tell our leaders right now when it comes to parking, I say, park according to your health. Just park according. Now, that's going to change. Today, my wife needed to park in the front door. She turned her ankle. It's going to change. I'm not going to judge you. But park according to your health, because at every step you take, boom, boom. God, I'm thankful for my health. And I know where it came from. Student, every time you pass a class, you smart, you ain't smart. You gifted. I know too many mentally handicapped people. Every time you pass a class, and then you come to church and you sit in a small group. You say, well, hey, small group, I don't have time for that. I've got to go to my other class. Well, what are you putting your trust in? every title that you have behind your name. Isn't that a way to keep reminding yourself that your trust is in God? Every time you're able to buy that new car or those new pair of pants. Last week, I took a fella out to buy groceries. And I said, do you need clothes? What you got? He says, I got 2 pairs of jeans. He said, I wear one this week and one next week. Why am I any better than that? How did I get where I'm at? Why couldn't I be in his place if he be in my place? Let me tell you what that's called. It's called the grace of God. And I, personally, need to live my life more like that. Trust in the Lord with all your heart when things are bad and when things are good. And I'm going to ask you to do something different today. Now, again, this is real safe because you know we're safe, okay? But I'm going to ask you to do something different today. And I'm going to close right here and I'm going to pray for you. But I'm going to ask you to do something different. I'm going to ask you to just bow your head and close your eyes. Everybody just bow your head and close your eyes. And again, this is real safe. This is real safe. But if there's something that has come to your mind right now that God has brought to your attention, that you may be putting trust in besides Him. I mean, I'm not trying to conjure up something. I'm not going to give you any ideas. But if there's just something that's come to your mind right now that God's brought to your attention that you may be putting trust in besides Him, I just want you to acknowledge that by just tapping your heart and pointing to God. That's it. And I'm going to pray. And not only that, but if you're not a Christian today, or you're not sure you're a Christian, and you want to become a Christian, I want you to just tap your heart and point up. And in doing that, you're saying today, I want to give my life and my heart to Jesus Christ. And you're going to tell me about that a little later. Will you do that? Let me pray. Lord, I thank you that you're the giver of all good things. And in the midst of good stuff and even in the midst of bad stuff, we're to trust in you with all of our heart. And I just pray for anybody here, those folks that may have tapped their heart about something that you've sort of pointed to, that they're putting their trust in beside you, that today would start a new day. A day of encouragement. That you're still in control. You still want to bless them. But you don't want us to put our trust in the blessing, but keep it in the blessing. And if there's somebody here today that just tapped their heart, saying, I'm giving my heart and my life to you today, give them the courage to just come to me and say, I did that. What do I need to do next? And I thank you and I pray. In Jesus' name.